Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are, and welcome to our webinar. Our webinar today is called The Hidden Meanings Shaping Customer Interest in Sustainability. So, there is clear customer interest in sustainability, but how do you sell it? Because just saying your product is sustainable doesn't seem to be the most successful way of actually launching a sustainable product. So what do you need to do to actually make this a success? That's what we'll be discussing today. My name is Arie van Berkel. I'm a Senior Vice President here at Lux and Group Director, and I'll be moderating today's session. Presenting today is my colleague Ujwal Arkalgut, EVP and Group Director here at Lux Research, and who's also our expert on anthropology, and he'll explain to you why anthropology is the key to answering the question I just asked. So speaking of questions, throughout the webinar, you can type any questions you have in the questions box on your screen, and time permitting, we'll try and answer and discuss those questions with Ujwal at the end of the presentation. If your question, however, doesn't get answered, then please do not hesitate and email it to questions@luxresearchinc.com, and we will respond. Of course, also, we'll monitor the questions that are left in the questions box after the webinar, and we'll take care of those as well. So with that, let's jump in and give the floor to Ujwal to start his presentation.
Thanks, Ari. This is obviously a very interesting topic, and a topic that I think pretty much every organization around the world is grappling with. In essence, on one hand, there's immense pressure to bring sustainable solutions forward, especially for existing lines of businesses. On the other hand, organizations also face this immense pressure because typically a sustainable alternative also comes with the need to ask the consumer to pay a premium, certainly to cover costs and so on. And of course, this is where the demand side sometimes doesn't match sort of the interest expressed by the consumer in actually wanting those sustainable alternatives. And one of the reasons why we think this is a fascinating topic is because when you apply the lens of anthropology, you realize why the consumer is, or why we might see a say-do gap in the marketplace. Because in essence, we're all used to asking, what are the technical requirements to make something sustainable? We're not used to asking what are the cultural requirements that will make something or something that's sustainable commercially viable or interesting to the consumer, that will make them want to pay that premium price. And I think that's really what we want to spend our time on today to get into. Now, before I do that, I will take a step back and just give you a quick crash course on anthropology. If you have not attended one of our webinars in the past, this is a good way to just introduce you to not just the concept of anthropology, but also to just explain why it's so powerful in helping us get to these implicit meanings, drivers that are really behind consumer interest in sustainable alternatives. So what is anthropology? In essence, anthropology is the study of meaning. As human beings, we all act toward things based on the meaning we ascribe to those things. But in particular, where anthropology shines is in its ability to decode the implicit side of the meaning equation. Explicit meaning is easy to decode. You can ask a human being, hey, what does something mean to you? And you will get that response. Implicit is difficult. And in essence, why anthropology is powerful is because anthropology deals with the study of the natural structure of language in the context of a topic. And to illustrate that, I'll take the example of gut health. So on your screen is what you're looking at is basically what we call the explicit associations between gut health and certain other topics in red here. Explicit associations, like I mentioned, are easy to get to. They're the direct linkages that human beings make between gut health and, let's say, a topic like weight loss or food or immune function. But the thing is, if we truly want to understand why these relationships exist, we want to get to the why behind the what. We need to understand what's, in essence, mediating these relationships. What are the associations of the associations? And this is where anthropology comes into play, because anthropology says, if we want to understand what gut health actually means and what it will mean in the future, we need to look at the full broader context of discourse around gut health. We need to look at the associations of the associations. So for example, you look at a topic like immune function. The moment you look at the associations of the associations, the full contextual picture, you realize, oh, actually, the interest in immunity is driven by those who believe they have some kind of a chronic health condition that they're dealing with. And then they link that to the presence of toxins in the body. They also link it to the concept of wellness and so on and so forth. If you didn't have that picture, then you would go to market by linking gut health to immunity, and you'd pretty much do what everybody else is doing. But if you had that background picture, you understood the why, you'd be a lot more focused in your efforts. You'd be able to truly make an impact in ways that others wouldn't. This is really the power of anthropology, is this understanding of the broader contextual meaning map, and then helping us decode the why behind the what. And this is in essence the framework we're going to apply today when we dissect the concept of sustainable alternatives. Now, before I jump into that topic, of course, I want to introduce you to a simple framework that I'm going to use consistently throughout this presentation. We call it our iceberg model. In essence, the iceberg model says, look, the surface of the iceberg above, that's visible above the surface of the water, is your logical frame. So taking that gut health example forward, gut health equals immunity is your logical frame. If we really want to get to the underlying hidden meanings, we have to decode two layers beneath the surface. The layer in the middle, the core beliefs, is perhaps the most dangerous layer, right? It's sort of where the Titanic hits, if you will. And it's the most dangerous layer because it requires interpretation. It requires the use of the social sciences of anthropology. So an example of a belief system is wanting to take control over my life, my body, my health, wanting to become more proactive in how I deal with my health. And that's what drives my interest in gut health. That's what creates the logical connection between gut health and immunity. And then it manifests itself in certain ways today. For example, taking supplements or perhaps drinking kombucha. But it might manifest itself in a different way tomorrow as new technologies come to bear, but the underlying core belief will hold. And that's really the task of anthropology, and my task today as I take you through this question of what drives an interest in sustainable alternatives is to help you see the underlying core beliefs, help you understand how those beliefs are evolving and what's their predicted trajectory, and then help you also see how those beliefs are manifesting today. Now, as you see this presentation, I want you to think about this in sort of a three-step process. The first step, as I mentioned, is helping you see the beliefs and manifestations through a pure consumer-centric lens. The next is to take that consumer-centric lens forward to look at how the consumer, how the human being prioritizes these beliefs. And then, of course, the third step is then start to apply that framework into or internalize it into your business, where you start to see how you might reprioritize those beliefs based on who you are and what you have to bring to market, if you will. So we're going to begin with the broad macro culture of buying sustainable alternatives. Just to be clear, I am not looking at the broad culture of sustainability. I'm looking very specifically at an interest in buying sustainable alternatives. And when I look at that culture, I immediately notice that this is a culture that is growing, but it is not mainstream yet. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. But what you're looking at in front of your screen here is our maturity index. It's a very critical concept in the field of anthropology. What it says is a trend is not something that's talked about a lot, that gets a lot of mentions. A trend is something that is understood to mean the same thing by enough people, okay? So this maturity index of approximately 19% basically says, imagine I put a random sample of 100 people in a room. I ask them the question, what does a sustainable alternative mean to you? 19 of them give me the same answer. The rest of them, 81 of them, give me diverse answers. So that's basically what this is telling me, is it's at 19% in maturity, and then it contextualizes it to tell me that means this is an early consensus, it's pre-mainstream, but we are seeing a continued build-up of consensus, which is fantastic. That means this culture, which was volatile in the past, is now starting to converge, starting to grow, which means it's also a critical time for action. Next, what I'm going to do is start to dissect this macro culture into its underlying contextual parts, into its micro cultures, to help you see how this macro culture of wanting to buy sustainable alternatives it translates into critical beliefs and manifestations, okay? So that first belief is this desire to escape consumerism and build or live a more authentic lifestyle. This is a very interesting belief system. In essence, every time I say belief system, imagine it like a math equation. Okay, a sustainable alternative equals escaping consumerism. Why am I telling you to think about it as a math equation? Because in essence, beliefs are nothing but proxies we build in our minds. So what I'm basically telling you here is the consumer is teaching us, hey, I will buy your sustainable alternative if it helps me feel like I'm somehow escaping this mad dash towards buying and acquiring newer and newer products, right? So if you can help me achieve that, if you can help me tell this story to my social circles, I will buy your sustainable alternative. And in fact, I will pay a premium for it. And there's some classic examples of this, of course, in the modern context. A great example of this is the vintage clothing, the vintage watch marketplace. Another example of this, of course, is you're going to see a lot of interest in the sharing economy now. Nowadays, you can pretty much share anything and everything from your home to an RV to clothing. There's a lot of manifestations of this kind of culture. There's, of course, other kinds of manifestations. For example, there was the anti-Black Friday movement, where there was this desire to actually not jump on the discount bandwagon, but instead replace it with the Green Friday movement, which is to buy more sustainable alternatives. So there are a lot of interesting ways in which this belief of wanting to escape consumerism is manifesting today. But always remember, manifestations will change and evolve. Belief systems will hold. And what we're now able to see is where this belief system sits vis-a-vis the macro culture. It sits quite a bit further back at 11% in maturity compared to 25%, which is where our macro culture is headed. It's also important to note that this culture is exhibiting volatility right now, which basically tells us that while there's an interest in this notion of living a minimalist lifestyle, this notion of escaping consumerism, there's still a fair bit of confusion on what this is ultimately going to mean. Let's go to belief system number 2, wanting to build cultural awareness and knowledge. Another fascinating belief system. In essence, this is teaching us that consumers are basically saying, hey, I will buy your sustainable alternative if it allows me to feel like I'm building cultural awareness and knowledge, if it allows me to show my social circles that I am diverse, I am globally minded. And I'll give you great examples of manifestations of this. Classic one is an interest in minority-owned brands. Why is that a manifestation? Because buying minority-owned brands is a way for the consumer to feel like they're connecting into a unique community. They're getting insight into a diverse community that they otherwise would not have. So it's a learning mechanism for them. Another example is getting into, let's say, ingredients or materials that come from different parts of the world that allows us to build cultural understanding of the world around us. Of course, artisanal handmade products, let's say, which comes from methods that are traditional or methods that have been passed on generation after generation. These are all examples of wanting to build a proxy around sustainable alternatives as a way to sort of build a globally minded, sort of culturally friendly, culturally aware sort of persona, if you will. And again, this culture sits just at 6.8% in maturity. So further back actually from the first belief we saw. But the interesting thing is this one isn't volatile. This is actually growing over the next 3 to 4 years and is going to jump to 12%. So actually we'll end up in a much better place than the whole idea of escaping consumerism. So belief system number 3, this pathway to a healthier life. So again, I will buy your sustainable alternative if it becomes a pathway to leading a healthier lifestyle. So again, many ways in which this manifests. Classic example, of course, is food. But I want to give you other examples that are not so obvious. For example, an interest in fibers and materials, whether it's clothing materials, whether it's materials in your curtains, in decor in your house. And you might say, how is that linking to a healthier lifestyle? Because people are connecting these materials to, for example, impact on air quality, impact on how it makes them feel, impact on the plants they have in their homes and the environment, the air they breathe in their homes. It's very interesting. So consumers are really starting to connect these fibers, materials, the way their home is organized, the way their home is decorated, all of this stuff to sort of this desire to live a healthier lifestyle. And a lot of it, even if it's not technically scientifically linked, is more so about how it makes me feel mentally, emotionally as a human being. And this is, I think, the part where, I started by saying we're so used to asking about the technical requirements and not used to asking about the cultural requirements. This is another example of one of those proxies. That's an amazing cultural example that if we don't pay attention to, we miss the boat, we miss the opportunity. Now, this one is already at 10.8% and it's exhibiting healthy amount of growth, reaching about 12.8% in maturity. And don't worry, we're going to put all of this into a single slide towards the end and actually contextualize and summarize this as well. Let's go to the next belief system. This is, I think, perhaps the most, I would say, the most blatant example that we've seen in our culture, right? Where sustainability becomes a symbol of my wealth and social standing. Classic example, the Tesla car. And certainly if you think about the way Tesla launched into the marketplace with a really expensive roadster, really further shows us how this culture ends up manifesting. Now, this whole idea of obviously building economic status is not new. This is an idea that, is innately human, but of course now it's becoming a proxy for sustainable. And part of the reason it's also happening is because, of course, you're seeing a lot of luxury goods manufacturers and luxury brands that are actually bringing new sustainable solutions to life, but they're banking on the fact that human beings are turning sustainability into yet another example or a proxy for sort of building social status and demonstrating wealth. Again, great examples, Stella McCarthy's All Together Now collection. Again, high-end luxury that is, really showcasing sustainable fashion. I talked about Tesla cars. I mean, there's so many examples of this right now in terms of, sort of the upper ends of pretty much any industry that you look at. And of course, you also see, many other examples that are maybe not so obvious, like people taking vacations and booking vacations in expensive high-end resorts that are claiming to be environmentally and socially sustainable. And there are many examples of that. You might see consumers talk about the Kum Mountain in New Guinea as an example of a resort that's powered by zero emission hydroelectric power systems and so on and so forth. So a lot of interesting manifestations happening. But again, the underlying belief system is very much about turning sustainability into this proxy for demonstrating my wealth, as a proxy for luxury. So again, this one is also exhibiting growth. So again, so far, the only microculture that's been volatile is the very first one we saw, where buying a sustainable alternative was a proxy for sort of escaping consumerism. Everything else is pretty much exhibiting growth. And again, all of it is in healthy early consensus stage, but exhibiting healthy growth and pushing the macro culture forward. The next belief system is staying technologically relevant. This is a really interesting one where, in essence, the consumer is turning sustainability into this proxy, into a demonstration of how tech savvy or tech relevant I am in my social circles. So in essence, buying a sustainable alternative is a way for me to show my friends, my colleagues that, hey, I'm not giving up yet. I'm keeping up in terms of the rapid pace of technological advancement, and I'm making sure that wherever our technology and our landscape is headed, I'm very much relevant and I'm very much headed there. And you see great examples of that, of course. One example is, of course, Tesla cars, because it's not just a symbol of luxury, it's also a symbol of tech advancement. There are many other examples of this, even a really interesting Wi-Fi connected little pod you put on your kitchen that basically composts your banana peel is another manifestation of this, where these are stories we can then tell the world around us. Even your smart smart systems for your lighting in your house, or solar panels that you might install on your roof. These are all examples, smart thermostats, all examples of ways in which we're using a sustainable alternative as a way to show the world that we're tech savvy and staying tech relevant. This one is perhaps one of the more mature microcultures, already at 13.4%, predicted to hit 15% in maturity over the next 3 to 4 years, exerting a fair bit of pressure and perhaps the most amount of pressure on the overall macro culture of seeking sustainable alternatives. So let's come back to our 3-step process. We went through step 1 of demonstrating these beliefs and manifestations. Step 2 is to then look at how these beliefs and manifestations play out through the pure consumer-centric lens. So what are the consumer's priorities? And here's basically how it plays out. Tech relevancy is the most mature. So it's basically the microculture that's exerting the most amount of pressure on the macroculture of seeking sustainable alternatives. Then you've got the symbol of wealth, healthier lifestyle, wanting to be globally minded, and this notion of free and authentic, escaping consumerism being the least mature of the lot. Now, what's interesting is the title of this slide, which is that the consumer always gives us this natural cadence of how we should go to market. Talk about the cultural requirements that I began with. What the consumer is basically showing us is that it doesn't matter how good your sustainable solution is. If you can't figure out how to fit into either one or many of these microcultures, you're always going to be pushing water uphill. You're going to be sort of losing control over the narrative that is in essence shaping the future of your product, and potentially also missing critical ways in which during the product development lifecycle you could have made these products just naturally more attractive to the consumer. So this is sort of really how we're able to build this an understanding of the natural cadence of the consumer. And then now we're going to go into step 3, which is, okay, now let's take the consumer's cadence and let's apply our industry's lens and potentially our own competency against these priorities to understand which areas could we possibly own. Now, obviously, there are many of you attending today's session, but what I've done is brought examples of other companies and other technologies that have done some really interesting things to actually bring and use these narratives into not just their innovation lifecycle, but also, of course, into their go-to-market strategy. And I'll start with the very first one. I'm gonna take you through, I think, 2 or 3 examples here just to demonstrate to you how actionable these findings are. Because we don't do this just because we want to have an intellectual exercise here, right? Ultimately, this has to impact the bottom line. And I want to give you some examples of how it does so. The first example is tech relevancy, and I'm deliberately bringing an example that's not so obvious. A cleaning product, specifically a toilet cleaner, realizes, hey, if I have to launch a sustainable toilet cleaner and make people pay a premium for it, I need to own one of these narratives. And the narrative I can own is tech relevancy. And how am I going to do that? I'm going to do that by creating a product that looks technologically advanced, that changes the narrative on how a typical toilet bowl is cleaned. We're all used to sort of, and we've seen these ads grown up with them, of the blue liquid poured into your toilet bowl and then you got to scrub. And along comes this new solution that says, hey, you're going to pour this thing in, it's going to bubble, it's going to action, it's going to feel like it's alive, and it's going to do the work for you in many cases. And turns out it's also not only more sustainable as a product, it's also packaged in a sustainable pack, and so on and so forth. And I'm referring to the EC30 toilet cleaner. If you don't know about it, I would definitely check it out. It comes from Procter & Gamble. Great example of how they have leveraged this narrative and transformed it into a product that is one of their fastest growing, fastest selling SKUs. Let me give you another example where somebody leveraged the symbol of wealth. And again, I'm deliberately using examples that are not so obvious. So a vintage watch dealer realizes, hey, if I want to sell vintage watches, I have to transform the industry. I can't have it feel like it's an industry of, going to sort of shady dealers of jewelry and trying to buy a watch that may or may not be authentic, getting cheated, all these experiences that have historically existed in all our minds that have scared us to buy anything old. Along comes this vintage watch dealer who says, hey, I have to change the narrative in this industry, and I have to do that by owning something. And they really believe that what they're doing is contributing to the circular economy. What they're doing is significantly more sustainable than the way the watch industry functions. So what do? They realize they can own and translate a vintage watch from being something that is, let's say, pawned off somewhere to actually becoming a symbol of wealth. And how do they do that? They do that by focusing on uncovering and selling some of the most rare and incredibly expensive Swiss watches to transform the industry. And I'm referring to Hodinkee here. If you don't know them, I would definitely check them out. It will suck you into the world of vintage watches. But again, a classic example of a company that understood this, perhaps not applying this into their product development lifecycle, but certainly applying this into how they've shaped their business model. My third example is one that leverages two of these cultures. So again, as a way to demonstrate that you don't have to only own one. These are not mutually exclusive microcultures. You can absolutely say, hey, I'd like to sit at the intersection of healthy lifestyle and technological relevancy. And this is an example of a shoe company that has basically transformed its product and turned it into a gateway for better for you lifestyle. But turns out they also use incredibly innovative materials in order to bring a product to life that is leading the industry in terms of its sustainability footprint. A pun intended, of course. And of course, again, here I'm referring to the company Allbirds. Again, a great example where they're leveraging a multitude of narratives in order to create a product where the consumer is willing to pay that slight premium in order to access that sustainable product. And of course, to then drive the storytelling around it. And again, it's an example where it's not just about marketing, it's about how to take these narratives and figure out how these cultural requirements can translate into technical requirements. And I think this is really where the Lux motive-based solution becomes really, really interesting, is to understand how these cultural requirements need to translate into the technical requirements that allow us to bring products to life that are from the ground up, built to engage the human mind in ways that we just could not conceive of in the past. So with that, I will leave you at the end of this presentation. Thank you for joining me today, and we'll open for questions.
All right, thank you, Ushwell. And you've certainly sparked some thinking here with connections you make between sustainability and core beliefs. There's a couple of questions here. One is about a potential tension within the core beliefs. So, for example, if you look at the core belief that a sustainable product is more expensive and therefore a luxury product, do you think that there's a tension between that core belief and the somewhat less mature core belief that people want to be authentic and not be consumerist, right? There seems to be, so if you're developing a product, do you have to make a choice? Or do you see there are ways to reconcile and bet on all of these core beliefs?
Yeah, whoever asked this question, fantastic question, because this is in essence one of the things that we talk about extensively with all our clients, especially in the innovation lifecycle. Microcultures can often butt heads, right? Microcultures can often be contradictory. They can push each other. And this is an absolutely fantastic example where a symbol of wealth does, in fact, oppose a narrative like wanting to be free and authentic, and to a certain extent actually also opposes the narrative of wanting to be globally minded, where if you look at people's interest in, let's say, wanting to invest in products that come from the developing part of the world, or products that come from, let's say, minority-owned businesses, there is definitely a healthy tension that's emerging here. What I will say, just through experience of doing this work over the last 8 years, is that eventually in culture, they do reconcile. So as these microcultures eventually enter into the mainstream, into what we call our zone of innovation, as you see on the screen, they do eventually reconcile, and there is a softening of the landscape. So to answer the question asked, here's your challenge. I always say begin with the most mature microculture, tech relevancy, and work your way downward to the least mature. And as you work your way downward, ask yourself, which of these cultures do I have the most natural connective tissue in terms of my existing and future competencies as a company that makes X, Y, and Z? That's the easiest way to land on the best starting point for you. The second thing is, obviously, if the challenge is, maybe that's where this question was getting to, is, hey, I can own free and authentic. I can also own symbol of wealth. Which one should I go toward? This will be an interesting challenge for you to solve. The way the data looks today, symbol of wealth actually gives you a lot more potential, and free and authentic does not. Now, this may change in the next 2 to 3 years, and this is why some of these things, it's not a one and done. You have to revisit this analysis every 6 months and keep your eye on how culture is changing. And sometimes there are what we call, big events that cause shifts in culture. The pandemic certainly was one of those events. Sometimes an election cycle, inflation, a recession, all of these are examples where it causes a shift in culture. So this is why we always look at this as a cyclical process where we want to keep coming back and understanding how we tap into this. But ultimately, if it does come down to it, you will have to make some hard decisions.
All right, thank you. That's very clear. And that actually is a pretty good segue into another question I have here. You were mentioning how these core beliefs are being influenced by events in society in general. Now, obviously, companies are also in society.
Yes.
So do you believe that companies are able to influence the evolution of these core beliefs? So for example, if I as a company am able to present a really good solution to be free and authentic, I don't know, maybe I have a very good solution to shop for groceries without using any plastic.
Yeah.
Can I move the needle on those core beliefs? Is it nonlinear? Do I have a chance of actually affecting the landscape here?
The short answer is absolutely yes. So the only case where you wouldn't be able to move the needle is if your microculture sat in established ideas. So after the zone of innovation. So if you saw a microculture after the zone of innovation, it's very difficult for you to move the needle. It's pretty much well established. It's set in its ways. Here, we're looking at microcultures that are all in early consensus. You can absolutely shape them. But here's a distinction I will make. I think, especially over the last 5-7 years in the world of Twitter and social media, we've all gotten this impression that the way to impact culture is through the creation of, marketing campaigns and solutions that go quote unquote viral. I will tell you this, doing this work as an anthropologist over 15 years, specifically building this technology over the last 8 years, I have never seen an example where a culture moves forward because some marketing campaign turns viral. Culture always moves forward when new solutions come into the marketplace and they are adopted by consumers. So this is why I think innovators, people in R&D, people in innovation, people who explore the front end of the life cycle, I think they don't get enough credit. And I think for all those of you in this room, what I'm trying to say is you can not only impact these cultures, but you can impact these cultures by what you launch, by the solutions, the business models you bring to bear, not by how you market it. So this is why I come back to this notion of cultural requirements and allowing these cultural requirements to be seeded into your innovation lifecycle, because if you do that, you will naturally impact these cultures and you'll be able to push the needle a lot faster than you think you can.
All right, thank you. I'm struggling a bit with unmute here. I have a very short question. We don't have a lot of time left, but I think it's important, so let's have a short answer here. A lot of our listeners and viewers have spent most of their career developing life cycle analyses and trying to quantify and prove how sustainable their products are.
Right.
Should they be highly disappointed? Should they have devoted their careers to showing how technologically relevant their solutions are, or is there hope yet for life cycle analysis?
So it's actually a fantastic question because every one of these microcultures sits within the context of sustainability. So that's a really important point, and a good way to actually end this session is please remember that if you say, oh, this is not about sustainability, this is about tech relevancy, you'll be making a mistake. This is about tech relevancy as a proxy for paying more, as a proxy for choosing a sustainable alternative. So the short answer is absolutely not. You have not wasted your time. You are headed in the right direction. I think what this is showing us is that there are additional requirements that perhaps may not be always so obvious, but bringing some of these additional requirements into the work you do can have a palpable impact out in the marketplace. And that's really our goal as anthropologists, is to bring sort of that the idiosyncratic nature of human life, and bring it naturally into the product development, the innovation, governance life cycle, so that we can start to think about how we can impact human behavior in a more natural and intrinsic manner.
All right. Thank you, Urshel. So that concludes our webinar for today. Of course, the slides presentation and the recording will be sent to all attendees through email. You will get it today. And after leaving the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a survey on today's presentation. And we would appreciate any feedback, of course. Now, take a moment, check out our upcoming webinars. They're listed also on our website. Remember, questions@luxresearchinc.com. If you remember this really important question that's been haunting you and you only remember it tomorrow, feel free to still send it and we'll take a look at it. Thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.